Hello and welcome to How to Go Independent. I'm your host, Sean Kernan. Today I'm going to answer one of the biggest questions that advisors tend to ask themselves before they decide to go independent. And it's a natural question, and that is, will my clients come with me or follow me or otherwise decide to keep doing business with me? So this is a natural question when you change firms, regardless of where you're going from and going to, but it's a particularly important question if you're going independent because you're not likely to have the financial bonanza that you might have if you go from one wirehouse to another wirehouse, for example. Or you're not going to have a salary like you might have it in some employee models or other situations. So the only thing you're going to have really when it comes down to it is the goodwill of your clients and their willingness and ability to continue to work with you. So in my own transitions and dealing with several dozen other advisors over the years, there's some different factors I've looked at that help us determine what are the likelihood that your client base, your book of business, your practice will transition to your own firm. So some of these are pretty obvious, but I'll touch on them anyways. And some of them are a little bit less obvious, and you might not be things you think of unless you've dealt in this arena like I have, and hopefully you can learn from my experience and others that have gone through this process. There's also a blog post on howtogoindependent.com under the frequently asked questions, will my clients come with me, that I posted pretty early on in the site. So that's the basis for this episode, because these principles they don't really change. They're evergreen, as we say. So the first thing that I would ask myself is, do my clients like working with me? That's a very intangible, warm and fuzzy, touchy-feely kind of concept, but if you have clients that, for whatever reason, decide they don't really like working with you and they'd be fine working with someone else, especially if you're leaving a firm where your account will quickly be assigned to someone else, then if you don't really jive with them, that's something to think about. Of course, you also want to ask, do you like working with your clients? And if the answer to that is no, then you probably don't need to worry too much about what they think of you. But if you, for whatever reason, thought someone was a solid relationship, but they've decided that they don't really want to work with you, then that's going to be an issue. So I think personal connections are a big deal when you're making this kind of transition. You want to kind of ask yourself, what's kind of interpersonal connection do you have with someone? And that is independent of these other factors that might sound similar. This is just, do they plain like you or not? The next item is probably the most important one, even before do they like you, and that's, do they trust you? Now, presumably they wouldn't be working with you in the first place if they didn't trust you. But sometimes, in a relationship, they might have thought you were the person to take them to the promised land financially early on, but decided later that they didn't really completely trust your advice or what you recommended for some reason. Either that's, it could be any number of reasons. But just keep in mind, when you're asking someone to move from a big name company of one or another, which you are likely doing in this situation, and putting their full faith and confidence in you, even if you have a large firm behind you, they have to trust your judgment, decision-making, that you're doing this for the right reasons. You're going to continue to do the best job possible for them. So, do your clients trust you? I think in most cases, our best clients certainly trust us almost without question, almost to a fault. But you just need to think that through as you look at your list of clients and deciding who may or may not come with you. Another big factor that I found in looking at, again, my own transitions as well as those of others, is how did your client come to you? Specifically, did they kind of buy you or did they buy your firm? And I mean that in quotes, because obviously they have come to rely on you if they work with you for any amount of time. But a lot of times the how that relationship originated seems to be important. There's a correlation that I see. If someone walked into your office off the street or called in because you're the nearest Merrill or Morgan or UBS office, even if you've developed a pretty good relationship with you, they may still remember and value the big name that they found you through. So I would just say be careful of overestimating the stickiness of a relationship that was developed because of the firm in particular. It could be that client has decided that they like you, but they like you partially because you represent the safety of this big name firm, and they're kind of attached to that more than you think. So be careful of that. Also, especially if you're still in decision-making mode or you're just researching your options, I would be leery of don't oversell the benefits of your firm, how great they are, how great their widgets are, how great your bull is, or your white shoe culture, or whatever story that your firm has to sell. Once you realize that you may want to do something different, stop selling the benefits of your firm and focus on how you take an interest in their future and how you can help directly. So I think that's a big thing that, especially early on, if you're younger in the industry or younger in general, if you've sold the benefits of, Merrill Lynch has the best this or the best that, and then you decide to go leave Merrill Lynch, you could be working against your previous self, which is natural. We all have to rely on most of us on a brand when we start to help us gain credibility. But I just would say be very, very careful of that, because whether it was your doing or just the client found you through your firm, I see a correlation in the retention numbers that an advisor is going to see, 60 to 90 days into a transition. And then as you're making a transition, you can also use that to your advantage. If you're using a big broker-dealer or custodian, I would leverage that if you need to offset the brand nameness of a firm. But just estimating retention, you're gonna want to figure out how they came to you. So if they're a walk-in, call-in, typically not as likely to move. Now again, if you've been with them for 30 years, that could offset this how you met them standpoint. So you're going to see some variability in retention based on whether or not your client came to you because of your firm or through referral or other type of introduction that is more connected to you. The next question is, how long have you worked with your clients? As you can imagine, the longer tenured relationships tend to be the most sticky, the longest standing. The longer you've worked with someone, the more likely they are to identify with you and not your firm. So, as long as you're covering these other blocks, all things being equal, I think anytime you've been with someone, say 10 years or longer, the odds of retaining them are quite high, because there's just that continuity and understanding of how you work with someone that I think it's hard to underestimate the value of a long-term relationship. I think a lot of times you start to take it for granted as that relationship ages, because you know each other fairly well and you don't have to think about it. But considering changing when you're a client, if you work with someone for 10, 15, 20 years, that's not a real attractive proposition, because of the time and emotions they've invested in getting to know you. They know that you understand their history and what drives them and what's important to them, not to mention the financial planning issues that are just part and parcel of the work you've done together. The only time this can maybe work against you, the time of your relationship, would be if you work together so long that it's become stale and you don't really have that connection, then the time might work against you and maybe people might feel like it's time for a change. But again, that would be addressed through some of these other questions that I'll be asking. The next question would be, are there any open service issues or recent things that have been sort of a headache for your clients? So even if you've worked together a while and you have a good relationship, if things have trended downward in service, or there have been mistakes that you or your team have made in the recent past, or that are particularly still ongoing, I think those could give people the opportunity to think twice about making a move. So I would make sure, especially with your largest clients, your top 15, 20, 30 relationships, which for most of us are going to make up about 70% of revenue or maybe more, you want to make sure those are cleaned up. And that's the kind of thing that's worth delaying to make sure time has passed, everyone's kind of happy, we've realized it's a one-time thing, so that when it's time to have that conversation, you can, one, have that behind you, and if possible, if you need to reference it, or if it comes up, if there's outstanding issues, if there's improved capabilities and where you're going on that front, whatever the issue is, I think that's a good thing to use to your benefit there. The next question I think you want to ask yourself for retention estimation is, how many services do you perform for your clients? Generally, more is going to be better. In other words, the more involved you are, the more parts of a client's life you touch, the more likely they're going to move with you. If you're just the investment person, then it's a little bit less likely, because that could be replaced theoretically a little bit easier than if you're helping them with their cash flow and insurance planning and emotional counseling about how to deal with their adult children, or all the issues that touch people's money. If you're involved in a lot of those, it's hard to replace you. But if you're only dealing with one part of that puzzle, whether it's just investments, just insurance, just cash management, just your bonds, it's a little bit easier to be replaceable. And I think we all know that from the practice management training you've probably received, either as a new advisor or throughout the years. Certainly we all have specialties where we can go deeper in our knowledge than other areas. But being a true financial planner and an advisor becomes very valuable when you're looking to move, because it's one thing to replace the person who helps me get my bonds, but if it's the person I'm counting on to develop and implement the plan for my retirement income, that's a lot harder job to hire for. Next big question that I think you should be working on before you even consider this is, will it be a headache for your clients to move? So this is not always going to be determine the retention percentage, but it might affect speed. So there's a lot of ways to prepare and plan to make sure you're ready to make it easy on your clients by finding the right help, planning ahead, that sort of thing. So I think you want to think through potential roadblocks. If you've worked at a wirehouse or a bank, and you have collateralized accounts or proprietary assets, it might be hard to move. Those kinds of things you want to identify early and spend time working through them to make sure not only do you know how to get around it, but you can confidently explain to the client, look, this will be a little bit tricky, but I thought it through and here's the plan. Because as long as you have enthusiastic but realistic assurance that you're going to work hard to make the process as smooth as possible, I think most people can get over the minor headache of having new accounts and setting everything up again at a new place. But you have to be ready to make it easy on them, or as easy as possible. So you want to minimize the headache and kind of think that through, and kind of identify the potential retention issues client by client, especially again in your best clients. On the smaller ones, that might be a way to determine if you really need to maintain a relationship, if it's somewhat tied to your existing firm. Maybe that's kind of an excuse that you don't move them with you if they're not going to be critical to your success. The next question would be, do you have any new business in the pipeline? This is an interesting situation because hopefully if you're doing your job, you always have something you're sort of working on for new clients or new opportunities for existing clients. And there's no doubt that when you change firms, you're going to have a little bit of hiccups trying to figure out how to communicate that and then execute it when the time is right. So if it's a new referral, I would recommend trying to tap dance a little bit and delay your initial meeting. Even, that might risk them deciding to go elsewhere. But what I don't think you want to do is have a meeting, open accounts, move assets, and try to explain, oh, by the way, now we're going to move them to this other firm right away. When I was leaving, I had a rollover check in the mail as I was changing firms, and it was a referral from someone I knew that it would probably follow me, but I had a sense it might take a while. And it took about 3 years later because It was someone out of state. I had never met him. In fact, I've still never met her. And it can be complicated. So I guess my counsel here would be not to get too worried about every single account, every single possibility. There will also be opportunities that pop up because you're in a new place, because you're self-employed. And I'll touch on that in a minute here. So, try to have a plan for each individual prospect or client or new opportunity, but it might be that you have to put stuff on the back burner if it's not absolutely time sensitive for a client or a prospect, and just make sure you take your existing clients versus the kind of the new business development aspect. Another question to ask yourself is, are you confident about going independent? Just like when we're new advisors, and a lot of us maybe don't have the confidence in our skills and ability and knowledge built up, you have to project confidence in what you're doing. Otherwise, some of the clients who may be a little hesitant about the move, they're going to look to you for leadership. So if you're excited, make sure that comes through. Make sure you're confident. If you're not confident, you probably need to wait on moving. So if they're the more worrisome, worrier type of client, you might have to be a little overzealous, more than usual in your excitement to get it through. And you may have to be prepared to explain to people why you didn't tell them about your plans a little earlier, because for someone that's not in our business, the abrupt nature of our resignation and transferring can seem strange. So you have to explain that calmly and confidently. And then one final big thought is you're not going to get 100% retention, and it's okay if you're really not close to that. Again, if you could get 80%, you're usually doing pretty well, and you're going to have a very high quality business compared to what you had before, because the people that have now chosen to work with you really like you and they trust you and they're with you, and that's a really great feeling. I can tell you from experience both times. It's really awesome to come out the other end of a transition and know you have clients that have voted for you. So because of the economics of being independent, you're going to net more even with 20% less gross revenue in almost all cases, unless you're trying to build a substantial infrastructure to grow from. But it's almost like, the pruning your book that a lot of practice management folks would recommend. That's a byproduct of changing firms in general, but going independent specifically, I think it gives you a great start in your new practice. So I hope that covers a lot of the generalities of trying to figure out if your clients will come with you. I would almost always recommend someone do a client by client analysis, so you can kind of gauge what's the probability you think of them coming, and you never really know 100% for sure. I guess with a few people you should, your family, etc. But you just never know until it's time to do it. But you can sort of estimate your probability, and that gives you a ballpark number. But I would just make sure you use these factors. If someone's really good client, but they've only been with you a year or two, that's a little bit less solid than someone who's been with you 17 years and has referred you somebody every year since. Even though they are probably both likely to come, the latter is just seems like a safer bet to me. Unless something has drastically changed. So those are the kinds of things to look at if you're looking at how to plan economically. I think these are good rules of thumb to use or questions to ask yourself. And then also, like I recommend in a lot of episodes, you want to talk to other advisors who've gone through this. Ask them what their retention was like. Sometimes you might hear a low retention rate, but if you hear that they came from maybe a bank channel, that's going to give you some important information, because how did people meet you? What did they buy you or your firm? In a bank scenario, that is usually, people meet their advisor through the bank. So those tend to be less sticky relationships no matter how much they like us. I think that'll do it for today, and we will see you next time.